Hi everyone, welcome to this new series of webinar dedicated to the Synod on Synodality, a process which will last 2 years and will be articulated in 3 phases in order to guarantee true listening to the people of God, explained the Holy See. This synodal path will first pass through a diocesan phase and a continental phase, which will give rise to 2 different instrumentum laboris, indicated a note from the Synod of Bishops. The last phase will take place more classically in Rome. For explaining this process and its main challenges, we are very proud to welcome Gilles Routhier. Thank you, Gilles, for joining us. Gilles is a very renowned Catholic theologian who has been the Dean of the Faculty of Theology and Religious Sciences of Laval University, and also visiting professor in many universities in the world and in Europe specifically. And Gilles has also been the president of our international research group on theology in FIUC-IFCU, the group which is called COCTI. All his research can be grouped around a unifying axis, the evolution of contemporary Catholicism, which includes several directions: Vatican II, the practice of ecclesial government in the Catholic Church, the current transformation of the parish, the communication of the faith, the missions, and the inculturation of Christianity. Of course, also the history of theology. So we are very proud to welcome you, Gilles, and to thank you for these 3 webinars that you will animated, and during which you will explain the main challenges of this so interesting and important process in our Catholic Church. Thank you.
Thank you. And welcome to everyone, and good morning, good evening, or good afternoon. It depends on where you are at the moment around the world. So I don't know if many of you have had this experience of walking together with a small synodal team, but I'm sure that all of you have already an idea about this synodal process. And if you are listening around you, some welcome this initiative of Pope Francis, welcoming it, and others are a bit challenged or disturbed by this initiative, and some certainly are against that, saying that with this the Church and the Pope is going in a false way, not respecting the way the Catholic Church should be governed, and saying that is leaving his own magisterial role. So the first meeting will be dedicated to what this initiative is about. And in my contact in many dioceses, what I find it is, and particularly in the Western world and Northern, it is that, oh, good, finally, we have the opportunity to say to the hierarchy what all our griefs or what we want to change in the Church, in the Catholic Church, etc. Is it about that? And I'm sure that many people at the end, and already they are saying, oh, we can tell something, but it won't change anything. And the final result won't change anything we want to in the Catholic Church. And the success of the synodal process will depend on the way we are thinking about it. The success or the failure of this synodal path will depend on our own conception of what it is about. How do we conceive it? When you are thinking to this synodal process, what are your expectations? And the way you will evaluate the success or the failure of the synod depend on the expectations that you have, or for you. What is the outcome expected? What do you expect from the synod? What should be the result of it? My main thesis is this: the synod, or this synodal process, is mainly and certainly first of all a learning process. And I quote the Vademecum: in creating the opportunity for listening and dialogue on the local level through this synod, Pope Francis is calling the Church to rediscover its deeply synodal nature. This rediscovery of the synodal roots of the Church will involve a process of humbly learning together how God is calling us to be the Church in the third millennium. So it is a learning process, and it is an opportunity for listening and dialogue. So the main purpose is not to draw the agenda for the Catholic Church in the coming 10 years. It is not, so you probably know that kind of strategic planification. And what we are doing this, it is not the process itself which is important. It is the result. The goal of a strategic planification is to draw the agenda for the coming years, for the coming 5 years of an organizations. So the synodal process is about something else. It is an opportunity for listening, and then we have to learn to listen to the others, to listen to the voices of the world, of the poor, etc. An opportunity for listening, for dialogue. And here also we have something to learn, because maybe we don't know how to dialogue with other people, to get in contact with them, and really to dialogue, to be a church of dialogue. So to see the synod and to look at it as an opportunity to learn, and to learn specifically what is the church itself, and to learn it by experiencing it. The church as a people made from diverse and various members. A people listening and trying to know the will of God and listening to the call. So the church is called to be something in the world and to announce something, to discover, or as it is said, to rediscovery. We have to rediscover what the church is. A pilgrim people walking together and being a sign in the world. So to see the Synod as an opportunity to rediscover and to renew the church and to rediscover the synodal nature of the church, it is something else. So the result, the success, will be measured by this. I don't know what it is about you, but how do we learn? Frankly, how do we learn? How have you learned the most? And what it is proposed, it is learning by doing, learning by experiencing, not learning by a decree or by a teaching, not learning by saying that the church is a synodal people. It is not by a teaching that we will learn this. It will be through a process, through an experience, learning by doing. It is typical of Pope Francis, the Pope Francis approach of the reform of the church. It is not mainly by writing a new law or by giving a new teaching. It is to give the opportunity to experience something and to learn through this experience. For instance, remember the apostolic exhortation Amoris Laetitia, which concludes two synodal assembly on the family. And following the two assemblies of the Synod of Bishops devoted to the family, many were expecting a clear teaching, thinking that a decree, a law, a norm, a teaching will resolve everything. Many were expecting a clear teaching on various questiones disputate. Rather, what we get and what the Pope offered was rather an invitation to enter into a process of discernment. He asked the local church, the local communities to discern. He didn't tell everyone what to think, what to do in various circumstances, but to discern with the people of God, with not only the bishop must discern, but it is clear in his apostolic exhortation that with the couples, the pastors have to discern, which is something else. And following the two assemblies, many expected a magisterial word that would be able to close debates. It was hoped that the exhortation would finally provide clear norms able to close theological discussions. In short, by means of precise legislation, the Pope will trace a clear path. Instead, the apostolic exhortation represents rather an invitation to open path, not to close, but to open path, but path of discernment and reconciliation. Not responding to the expectations. And I think that it will be the same with the Synod. The Synod will not respond to some expectations. But the apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, not responding to some expectations, ended up disappointing and surprising all the parties. This text certainly does not correspond to the horizon of expectations of many. Therefore, I believe that it is of great significance, because not responding immediately to the expectations, the Pope moves the debate. The exhortation shifts the debate by emphasizing a process of discernment rather than proposing a legislation. And we have to learn what is it about discernment, a word with which we are not familiar. Number 300 of the apostolic exhortation of the Pope, after having closed the way of a normative or legislative approach, traces a path. And this path is a process of legislation. And I quote briefly few words. All that is needed is a new encouragement to responsible, personal, and pastoral discernment. All that is needed is to encourage responsible, personal, and pastoral discernment. It is not to proclaim or to sign a new law. And why is it this rather than a norm? He says, if we take into account the innumerable diversity of concrete situations, such as those mentioned above, we can understand that we should not expect from the Synod or from this exhortation a new general legislation of the canonical kind applicable to all cases. And here we are. We have lived in the church, in a church, in which, and even for the bishops, we always like to criticize the magisterial, saying that the legislation, the norm, the teaching is not adapted. But when the call is to discern in a responsible, personal, and pastoral way, suddenly we don't know how to do that. And we are saying, oh, the Pope should tell us what to do. We are not obedient normally, but when he says it is your responsibility, your pastoral duty to discern, then we say, no, the Pope is not playing his role. So it is the typical way of doing of Pope Francis. In the apostolic exhortation, this apostolic exhortation has left discussion open and invites further discernment. So the term itself, discernment, we can find it 30 times in the exhortation. He invites further discernment on issues that cannot be regulated by general norms or universal doctrinal teachings. And this leads to the requalification of the work of the whole ecclesial body, and also presupposes the implementation of a process of discernment. Here we are to the synodal process. No one, I think, so I haven't read at the time of the publication of Evangelii Gaudium. It was not at that time underlined that the term process was already found 24 times in the apostolic exhortation Evangelii Gaudium. It says the importance given to processes by Pope Francis. This concept is at the heart of the section 3 of chapter 4. This section is devoted to the common good, peace, and society. If this section were the question of becoming, the question of, I call becoming together a people, is valid for the societies, it is also valid for the church, a pilgrim people of God. And these processes assume that we work over the long term and not in the urgency of the moment. They take time. A process takes time. To tell or to give a teaching, it doesn't take time. But I think that we learn more from a process than from a norm. So it means that if you want to reform something, to change the mentality, not only to change the law, it takes time. and require the participation of as many people as possible. This is, says Pope Francis, how a nation becomes a people. And I quote, "This principle enables us to work slowly but surely, without being obsessed with immediate results. It helps us patiently to endure difficult and adverse situations or inevitable changes in our plans. It invites us to accept the tension and think about the synodal process. To accept the tension, or when he says to endure difficult and adverse situations. It invites us to accept tension between fullness and limitation, and to give a priority to time. One of the faults which we occasionally observe in socio-political activity is that spaces and power are preferred to time and processes. Giving priority to space means madly attempting to keep everything together in the present, trying to possess all the spaces of power or self-assertion. It is to crystallize processes and presume to hold them back. Giving priority to time means being concerned about initiating processes rather than possessing spaces. Time governs spaces, illumines them, and makes them links in a constantly expanding change, with no possibility of return. What we need then is to give priority to actions which generate new processes in society and engage other persons and groups who can develop them to the point where they bear fruit in significant historical events, without anxiety, but with clear convictions and tenacity. So I think that through the synodal process, and it is enlightening this process, through the synodal process, it takes time, 3-4 years. It involves many people, but rather to solve everything with norms, it is through this process, rather than possessing all the space of the power. He gives us an opportunity to listen to each other, to listen to God, and to dialogue. It takes time, but he is convinced, Pope Francis, that these processes may bear fruit, and these processes, which engage many people and groups, can develop something with no return. The conviction of Francis, according to which it is necessary to privilege the processes of discernment, which are part of the duration rather than to possess the space of power, is not without arousing for many some concerns. However, the Pope, who emphasizes the synodality of the Church, make the synodal process as a matrix for the construction of the Church as a people of God. He is convinced that only these processes allow Christians to become a people. I quote number 220. Yet becoming a people demands something more. It is an ongoing process in which every new generation must take part. A slow and arduous effort calling for a desire for integration and a willingness to achieve this through the growth of a peaceful and multifaceted culture of encounter. Recognizing that the people of God, in the diversity of its members by virtue of their functions, conditions, charism, ministries, are subject of action and initiative, he authorized them to be subject of action and to initiate a process of discernment. It is therefore both every Christian, but also every community who is called to discernment, a process which is fundamentally community or ecclesial, and not a private activity or an individual process. Reading several writings of Francis, we see that this discernment left to the local churches concerns the path of evangelization and the calls to conversion. We have there already at the very beginning of the pontificate of Francis the clue to understand the synodal process. We have in some way the background to comprehend the synodal process as a mean not to make a new agenda for the church or to draw a new pastoral plan, but to rediscover by doing, by experiencing through a process what the church is about, a people, and the synodal nature of the church. It is then learning by doing. It is, as the Vademecum says, an experience of authentic listening and discernment on the path of becoming the church that God calls us to be. In other words, a lived experience of discernment, participation, and co-responsibility. So we are called to live an experience of listening, discerning, an experience of participation and communion. In this respect, it is important to understand the aim and the goal of the synod and to evaluate the results of the process according to this criteria. We must be clear about that, and it is well defined in the Vademecum. I quote, in this sense, it is clear that the purpose of the Synod is not to produce more documents. It is not to produce more documents. So then, what is it about? The objective of this synodal process is not to provide, I quote again, a temporary or one-time experience of synodality, but rather to provide an opportunity for the entire people of God to discern together how to move forward on the path towards being a more synodal church in the long term. So it is the church which is built up through this process. It is not less than to transform or to reform. It is his way of doing a reform. It is a mean to transform or to reform our way of living together as a church people of God, to renew the church and to renew our mentality and practices. The objective of the current synod is to listen as the entire people of God to what the Holy Spirit is saying to the church. We do so by listening together the Word of God in the Scripture, and then by listening to one another. So it is a living experience, a learning process. And by walking together and reflecting on the path traveled, we will be able to learn. So we are invited to renew our lifestyle. How do we live together our Christian faith? It is to discover or to learn a way of being, and then to renew the church. To renew not only the structures, but our way of living. I conclude. Depending on the way we understand the synodal process as a learning process to renew the church and to acquire a way of being or a way to determine the agenda of the Catholic Church for the next decade, depending on our way of looking at the synod, we will judge of its result. The most difficult, I find, the most difficult thing for the majority of the Catholics, it is to enter in a learning process. We are accustomed to receive norms and laws rather than to learn through a process. Thank you.